Some of you are probably thinking about getting a part-time job when you're a little older. And you may already know that by law, you can't work until you're 14. But did you know that in the early 1900s, there were no laws against kids working? You could go to work as soon as you could do the job. Georgia's largest industry is textile manufacturing, and some of the mills have been operating since the turn of the century. These children worked in those mills. They worked long hours for low wages at jobs that were often boring and sometimes dangerous. Today we'd say these kids are too young for industrial work, but that's not the way it used to be.
After the Civil War, Georgia is very poor because of the Civil War. The cotton prices fall, and the rural area is poor. Farmers who can't make it on cotton farms, who have fallen so far in debt, they will leave the land and they will come to the cities or come to the mills to work in the mills. And quite often it's the women who come first. The men will cling to the land longer. And with the women will come the children.
Children followed their parents into the mill. Times were hard. Families needed the money. There was no question who collected the children's paychecks.
My daddy. We had to help keep everything going, you know. Well, he didn't draw much more than I did, I don't imagine, because, you know, they just didn't make much money back in those days, and everything you made, you had to contribute to the family.
These men and women began working in cotton mills when they were very young, and they remember.
I started working in Lynette Mill the year I was 14, and I just worked part-time, what we call part-time, and that was 6 hours a day. But I did start at 14, and I made about a dime an hour.
Jeannette is 80 years old. When she was 14, she worked part-time because she was going to school. But many child workers dropped out.
It was unusual to graduate from high school in the years that we graduated. It's not like now. You go to school and you graduate, but back then if you could work, you worked, didn't you?
And we didn't have required attendance, school attendance back then. You know, you could go to school or not go to school, you know. And a lot of them didn't ever go, some of them beyond the 6th grade.
Children who didn't go to school worked full-time, which was a 12-hour day. But even a part-time shift of 6 hours was long for kids who also went to school.
Children would go to school, then they'd go work in the mill at night. And they wouldn't necessarily work 12 hours, but they would go in at night and do some work. So the work suffers, their schoolwork suffers, and they're tired.
When we look at photographs of child mill workers taken from 1905 to 1915, we see young children with dark circles under their eyes. They look weary and much older than their years. And there's something else we notice. Even though they work around heavy machinery, many don't wear shoes.
There's a story out of a mill up the river from Columbus, from Langdale. It was pine flooring, and he had these big carts that they pushed around that carried various things from one loom to another. And the wheels on the cart were metal, and they would tear up the floor. So every manager, every superintendent inside the mill carried a knife so they could cut the splinters out of the children's feet.
The work was so hard and the dust so thick.
Even the air was bad. The lint that covered mill workers' clothes also clogged their lungs. People who worked for years in the mills sometimes had a condition called brown lung. There was so much lint in their lungs they couldn't breathe normally. Brown lung could be fatal. The mill was not a place for children.
Some of them, they'd take the children up there at 6 and 7 years old and put them to work in the mill, and if they didn't do a good job, the boss take them out there and spank them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that was true or not, but I've heard that all my life, that, you know, that they didn't have a child labor law, you know.
Georgia was slow to pass child labor laws. In fact, by 1911, Georgia was the only state that allowed children under 12 years old to work in factories. and some parents wanted it that way.
When reformers in the early 1900s tried to pass laws to limit child labor, many of the parents will send petitions to say, don't limit child labor. We need them to work.
Mill owners also opposed child labor laws.
I think overriding is the fact that child labor was cheap. It doesn't cost much to have children work. And there are a lot of tasks they could do very well.
Today, state and federal laws are aimed at keeping children in school and safe in the workplace. You must be at least 14 years old to get a job. You must be at least 16 to work in a mill. You can only work 3 hours a day on school days and 8 hours a day on non-school days. And you can't work before 7 a.m. or later than 7 p.m. A lot has changed since Jeannette Scales and her friends started work at the age of 14.
When you worked 6 straight hours, you worked. It was work, it wasn't play. And even that 6 hours at 14 was a long time.